Well, welcome everyone. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the future in the cloud, and I assume most of you have a finance background, and so maybe the cloud is a little bit new for you. And it's correct to say that we launched in 2018 here, Workday did in South Africa, but we've been around since 2005. And the reason why I mention that is that there's been a long journey for us as a company figuring out how to do the cloud for enterprise applications. If you think about it, so if we think back to 2005, and you think about starting a company back then versus today, a software company building technology. If you were to build a company today, you'd obviously, if you're going to build a software company, you'd start in the cloud, right? I mean, that's the obvious thing if you're going to start a new company today. But back in 2005, that wasn't obvious at all. And there were some serious challenges when it came to that because of what we were doing. So for Workday, when we first started, we were looking at enterprise software. And if you think back to enterprise software in 2005, in many ways, it's similar to what you may have today with your on-premise systems. It was seen as old, inflexible, and hard to use. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Maybe some of your current systems, this is a little bit what they seem like. So when we were looking around trying to build enterprise systems, we said, well, we don't want to do that. That's not, we don't want to recreate that. And certainly when you're looking at systems that you're creating inside your organizations to support finance, you don't want to create something that's old, inflexible, and hard to use. That's not your goal. So we had to look around at the time, back in 2005, and say, well, if we can't look at enterprise software companies, where can we look? And even back then, there already were organizations out there that were showing the way. So Google, Netflix, Amazon, and many others that were already serving millions, hundreds of millions, and now billions of users. If we call this the consumer internet, even back in 2005, they were already showing us the way when it came to the cloud. And I think this is really instructive when you're thinking about how do you approach the cloud for your organization, to think about not how do we replace our enterprise systems and put them in the cloud. It's how do we become more like the way these applications function in our lives. In your daily life, when you use these applications, many people, if you're at home and you're working on one of these applications and you're just ordering something or you're searching for something, you just expect it to all work seamlessly and easily. And then you go into work, and it's a very different experience, isn't it? Right? You get these systems that are old and antiquated, and they're enterprise grade. They're secure and they're integrated and all those things, but they're not easy to use. And so we wanted to be inspired by these organizations, and to do that, we just added these two concepts together of, instead, we wanted it to be new, innovative, and easy to use, just like these consumer internet organizations. And so we said we want to get rid of this and instead do this. So we put together those two concepts, and that's exactly what we came up with Workday. So I don't want this to all be about what we built at Workday. I also want you to think about it in terms of how you do this for your organization. How do you evaluate cloud applications and what they can do for your organization? And a big part of when you're considering how you're going to build out these applications and how you're going to use them is to think about what it means to put it in the cloud. The cloud isn't just about taking your data from your databases that are on-premise and then putting them on somebody else's servers somewhere up in the cloud. That's not really much of a benefit. And for most finance departments, you look at the balance sheet for that and you say, that's not going to work out. Even if I'm saving a little bit of money, the level of effort of moving to the cloud doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think this was one of the big challenges that we faced when we first started. So one of the things we said we would do is we said we're only going to have one platform. And this is instructive. So when working with programmers, so I work with developers, programmers, or with anybody in an organization, if you give them a good problem set, you say, here's the problem you have to solve. You talk to one of your AP clerks or to a controller and you say, here's the problem you need to solve. You need to create this report or do this work. They're probably going to be pretty good at that. They're going to come up with a solution for you. That's what you pay them for. And it's the same when working with developers. But if you then add in a bunch of constraints about how they can do it, the methods they can use and the tools and approaches that they can use, that's actually when they get really creative. And I know often creative and accounting should not be said in the same sentence, but the creativity and understanding how to solve a problem is a big part of accounting as well. For the finance department, you have to get creative about how do you solve this problem of being able to report and understand how money is flowing in the organization. And I've certainly seen a lot of accountants who are incredibly creative when it comes to understanding how to operate Excel. So for Workday, we did just that. We said to our developers, we're not going to give you an option on how to build this. So one of the big complaints that we heard back, so think back to 2005, imagine us talking to a prospective customer back in 2005 saying, hey, why don't you put your finance and HR data up in the cloud in 2005? The reaction almost universally was, the cloud is adorable, it's cute, but we're not going to put our core system of record up in the cloud. And even today, for a lot of organizations, it's the same reaction of, we can't risk putting that data up in the cloud. We're worried about compliance, we're worried about security, we're worried about integration, we're worried about governance, we're worried about global operations and performance of the application. We can't do this in the cloud, we have to have control of this. And I certainly understand that. And that's exactly what we told our developers. We said, we're not going to give you an option, a backup option here, where you can go ahead and do this and do it on premise. We're only going to let our developers build it in the cloud. And that forced them to get creative, because we also told them, you need to meet the security requirements of global organizations. You need to make sure it can be integrated. You need to make sure it covers governance and language and regions and all of those requirements and compliance. So we backed them into a corner, and they had to get really creative about how they did it. And I think this is instructive in terms of, regardless of where you are in the business, that when you give people a problem set, and then you add to it, here's the principles we're going to abide by while we're doing that, they can get really creative. And I'll give you some other examples of that for Workday as well. So one example is, we said, we only want to have one source of the data. So sort of imagine this today. How many of you go through consolidations, intercompany transfers? Nobody does consolidations? Few organizations. We're having to look at multiple GLs and be able to push all that data together, right? So I have a question too. This may sound like an HR question, but how many people are confident they can tell me the global headcount you have in your organization today? You're in the finance organizations, that's not HR's problem. You need to tell me how many people you're paying in your organization today. How many people can do that? Raise your hand. Few? That's not a whole lot of confidence there. For those that even raise their hand, if I said, well, does it agree with what the HR department says? That's, oh, really? Okay, so maybe you're on Workday, I don't know. But it's a really hard thing to do, right? It's a really difficult thing to do. And these are basic questions. You should be able to answer these questions for your organization. If you think about, like, for Workday, we came here today and we have a booth downstairs and up here for both HR and for finance. How much did we spend for marketing for that? Could, in your organization, if you came to a conference like this and you went to the booth and you set up a booth and you had all the shirts that you purchased and the laptops and the other marketing materials, can you go into the GL and say, this is how much it cost us to do that marketing campaign? It's a lot of work. You can do it, but typically it's in a spreadsheet or 100 spreadsheets spread all over the organization. So for Workday, we said, we want to start with one source of the data. We want all that data to be in one place. But how do you do that? How do you pull that off? Well, we had to challenge some of our basic assumptions. So one of the assumptions that you have in a finance organization is that the data is kind of spread all over the place, right? So we said one of the problems of having one source of the data is relational databases. Now, I know this isn't a technical audience, but you guys all have heard of relational databases, right? I mean, it's the core of every system that is out there for whatever you're running. And we actually looked at this and said, we can't use relational databases if we want everything to be in one place. And where do we learn that from? These consumer internet companies. So again, taking your inspiration from those consumer internet companies and how they're doing things. So how do they serve out millions and hundreds of millions of users in a great performance? They put everything in memory and they avoid relational databases. We said, hey, maybe that works for us too. This is a challenging concept. This is a difficult thing to do, and it's been a struggle for Workday since the day we started. So when you're laying down these principles for your business and how you operate, keep in mind people will be resistant because what you're going to ask them to do is hard. It's out of their comfort zone. I've recognized over the years, I've come to a truism, which is there's two things that financial administrators hate. One is the way things are, and the other one is change. It turns out that's kind of difficult to come to a resolution between those. That sort of change is required. The next one is one security model. And this very much sounds like a technical topic, but it's not. So think about in your current systems. How many security models are there? What's a security model? A security model is who can see what. So if you go into your finance system and you say, what can I see in the system? Well, it's controlled by maybe role-based security. You're probably familiar with that term, right? So depending on your role in the organization, it determines what you can see. But what about when you run a report? Does that apply that same security? What about when you do an analytic in your data warehouse? Does it control the same security? Probably not. In most cases, IT is taking care of this for the finance department, and in many cases it means that they won't generate reports because of it, because, well, I can't distribute that data. And for every organization out there, if you have subdivisions, departments, different groups, and you expect them to run in a profitable way, and you can't give them access to the data, that's not going to happen. It's just not possible. If they don't understand how money is coming into their organization and how it's leaving the organization, and then you expect them to be participating in being profitable, that's a fool's errand. But that's often what we do because we can't give them access. And it goes back to something as simple as a single security model. This is hard to do, right? And all these principles are hard to attain. And related to that is what we call one experience. So again, thinking back to these consumer internet companies. So think of the experience you have with any of these applications. So imagine Amazon, if you're familiar with Alexa, right, the device you can talk to. I don't think many people use it for this, but you can talk to it and say, I want to order, I want to order a book. Imagine you're doing that, and then halfway through, you decide, well, I'm going to look at the reviews for the book first. So you go to your desktop machine or your laptop, and you look through the reviews. And then before you're finished, you have to get going, so you pull out your phone and you finish the order from your shopping cart there. So that's 3 different user interfaces, totally different. One doesn't even have a visual side. The other one is with a keyboard and a mouse, and then the final one is just using your fingers on a small screen. But it's the same experience. So the experience that you have with the application is consistent. And that's what we want to produce with our applications. And it's what you should be looking for all of your employees. For everybody who interacts with an application of any kind, they should be having a single experience interacting with your company. And so that's exactly what we did in terms of how we built out not just the mobile, we have one mobile application, but everything about it needs to be one experience for the users. And I think this is one of the other big challenges for a lot of finance departments is, who are your users for the finance information? It's the CEO, right, the CFO, the organizations you need to report to, maybe a few top VPs or something like that. But I would argue for really modern finance organizations, a big part of when you consider moving to the cloud is you need to expand that audience to every single person in the organization. And does that sound a little scary, right? Giving out financial data to everybody in the organization? And you should be a little nervous about that. And that's why you need to have a consistent single source of the data, controls around that make sure that you can confidently give out data to somebody and not worry that they might be able to see something that they shouldn't have access to just because they went into a report or somebody sent them an Excel spreadsheet that had information they shouldn't have access to. And then, of course, one experience. And the last one I'll skip over really because I don't want to spend a lot of time here. This is very specific to Workday, which is one community, but I think it's also instructive in terms of how you run your business, is once you lay down these foundations of everybody's looking at the same information, then you can have a much more productive conversation. And for Workday, with community, it's that everybody participates uses the same platform. So for Workday, for customers of Workday, the benefit they get is if they want a report like a BBBE report or something, related, something like that that's specific to a particular market or industry, they can get that from another customer because everybody's using the exact same system. And think about that inside your organization of if you get everybody using the same data and you're confident that you can spread that out throughout your organization, especially when it comes to the money in your organization, then it creates a community inside your organization as well. So it allows the managers to be able to have a peer-to-peer conversation about this is how I'm running things in my division, and look in comparison to this other division in real time. That's what you want to be able to do, but you have to have everybody on a common data model, a common platform, a common security model to be able to do that. So that needs to, all of these pieces, you really need to make part of your move to the cloud. So rather than we're taking our databases and we're putting them up in the cloud, it needs to be, we're trying to get onto a single platform. Whether it's Workday or another system, it's that concept of trying to make sure that everybody has that one view of the data, and it needs to be specific to their role. So I want to talk to you for a minute about some of the more advanced technologies, because one of the things that I think happens in our industry, which is software, is that there tends to be a lot of hype. Whenever something new is built, people get really hyped about it, really excited about it. And at Workday, we look at the world a little differently, and this is how you look at your own business. You look at how can I serve my business? How can I make sure that my business understands how money is flowing through the organization? And the cool technology thing, you want to apply those things if it helps you run your business. And we're the same at Workday because we don't sell technology, we sell a service. If we sell HR and financial in the cloud, so we don't really care about the technology as long as it helps us serve that. So I'll give you some examples of this. Nod if you've heard some of these terms. So platform as a service, have you heard this? Yeah. In-memory analytics. Yeah, anyone? How about blockchain? This is big right now, right? Hopefully none of you bought Bitcoin. I apologize if you did. How about bots? Yeah, you heard a lot about this. And of course, a huge one is AI and machine learning. So these are all exciting technologies. And at Workday, we're doing all sorts of cool stuff with this, which I can talk about. But I think more interesting than to all of these topics is they have something in common, which is all of these are highly dependent on the data. All of these new technologies are highly dependent on the data that is underlying these technologies. And the challenge is that in most organizations, most of that data is what I would call noise. And I'll show my age here, but you remember when you turn on, for those, you guys can nod if you've got a few gray hairs, you turn on the radio, right, and you'd hear static through the radio. That's the noise, right? And the concept is the signal to noise ratio. So the sound, the voice or the music that you hear coming through, that's the signal. And for most organizations, their data is really noisy. And this is even true in finance. I know you've got the GL and you're confident that the journal lines are all entered well, but when I ask a question like a global headcount report or how much does it cost for this marketing campaign, you have to run off to a bunch of spreadsheets and POs and invoices and all sorts of other things to be able to determine what is that data that's not captured in the same place. So that data is all over the place and it's hard to trust. One of the CFOs I work with used to call his board meetings dueling spreadsheets. Right? People would bring up their different spreadsheets and they'd say, no, this is the number, no, this is the number, and that's that noisy data. So at Workday, our goal was to first remove all of this noise, and to do that, we wanted to get down to the signal and get rid of that noise. So to do that, I already talked about for Workday how we chose to do that, and that's through all of these other power of one pieces, by being able to get it down to one. But let's talk about each of these in turn and why it's so important that you really get your data in order first. I will say I'll start with machine learning on the right because people are always curious about that. So machine learning is a huge revolution going on right now with machine learning if you look out in the industry. My personal opinion is, have you guys heard of the hype cycle? the Gartner hype cycle. So there's this, for any new technology, there's this hype cycle where everybody gets super excited about stuff and you know, spends tons of money on it, and then the bubble bursts and they don't get a return on investment. And then there's what's called the trough of disillusionment, where everybody decides that technology is actually useless, and then it slowly rises up and you find out it's actually useful. The cloud's already been through this. There's lots of organizations that hopped on really early, didn't see the value, then everybody said the cloud doesn't matter, and then now it's gotten to the point where it's really solid, it does the right things, it's a valuable resource, and people are using it. And this has happened with all sorts of technologies over the years. I think machine learning is right in the middle of this hype cycle right now. So we're almost to the peak. In another couple years, the bubble's gonna burst, and everybody's gonna spend a lot of money on machine learning technologies that don't deliver. And the reason why is the data. So if you think about a small history lesson here, back in the 80s and 90s, AI was a huge thing. If you wanted to get funding for a cool new company in Silicon Valley, just say you did AI for something. The bubble burst after that, in the early 2000s, you couldn't get funding for anything. So the last thing in the world you would ever say is you had anything to do with artificial intelligence. Like that was the way to make sure you didn't get any money. So people stopped talking about it. And then it came back. Well, the reason why it came back is because of those companies I was talking about before. So think about, who are the leading companies when it comes to artificial intelligence right now? It's Facebook, it's Google, it's Amazon. It's companies like this that have not just the technology, they have the data. In fact, Facebook is getting sued around the globe for the fact that they have all of this data, right? This is the revolution that is actually happening. So it's not a machine learning revolution. That's part of it. There's certainly been advancements there. It's a data revolution. So think about that for a minute, and then think about, in your finance organization, have you gone through a data revolution? Is there something really fundamentally different about how you're capturing data in the organization? How you're storing that, how you're making it possible for people to access that? Because if you want to do machine learning and do it well, you need to fix that data problem first. So I'll go next to bots. And I'll come back to machine learning in a minute. So Workday is doing things around machine learning. I'm not going to talk specifically about that, because if you want to learn more about Workday, we've got booths. You can go and talk to folks there, and I'll be around as well. But when it comes to bots, I think there's something similar going on. How many people use Siri or Google Voice or something like that on their devices? Talk to their devices? Not that many, huh? So I'm sure you do. How many people just don't like raising their hand? Is that, yeah? Okay, I think I get the problem here. I see. So, might be a cultural thing. If you've ever done that, you've experienced that there's a few things that maybe you're used to asking your device. Maybe what's the weather, or what time is it? One of the most common things that people ask their mobile devices to do is they'll say, set a timer. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. You have a mobile phone which costs, I don't know, 15,000 Rand or something like that, right? If it's an expensive one. And then at home, where I live in London, I have a kitchen timer which costs 5 British pounds. And I'm using this device at 1,000 times or 200 times the cost rather than a kitchen timer. Why do people do that? Why would you do that? Well, it's because of the convenience of it, but it points out part of the challenge with bot interfaces. So bots can only do so many things, and people can only remember so many things that a bot could do. So the bot revolution is starting to happen, but it's very narrow. And I think the challenge that we see, if you see robots running around the show floor and stuff, the question to ask is, can you first solve the data problem? If you can't do a global headcount report, and if you can't tell me how much that marketing campaign costs, then throwing a bot in front of that is not going to solve your problems. Bots are not going to solve world hunger. They're going to be useful, and you can do things with them, like setting a timer that would be hard on your phone otherwise, but the use cases are really narrow for it. So I would caution you there. So blockchain, hopefully, I don't want to really spend any time talking about blockchain. I will say this about it. How many people get questions about blockchain and want to try to answer those questions? You probably get this in the finance group, like, are we going to have blockchain-enabled transactions? So I'll give you a quick description of it, just so you have this in your back pocket for a party if you go to one. So blockchain is a way of making a claim, claiming, and I'll use Bitcoin as the example. So let's say I claim I have a Bitcoin, and then being able to verify that claim, if you wanted to buy that Bitcoin from me, you being able to go to an independent third party and say, do I really own that Bitcoin? And the blockchain allows you to do that. I won't describe the technology much further than that, but it's a way to make a claim. Another person can verify that claim without going and go to an independent third party. And by independent, I mean not a specific organization. So that's why Bitcoin exists, right? The idea is that you could have a Bitcoin sold to another person and you don't need to go to a bank to be able to verify that that transaction happened. It can be a distributed network to verify that. So the interesting bit for Workday actually is our first uses of blockchain are actually going to be on the HR side, not on the finance side. And there's a reason for this, is because we're very strong on the HR side, and although we have some great finance applications, they're still developing in terms of the number of customers using them. And so, because the challenge with blockchain is not the technology, it's the standards. It's everybody agreeing this is how we're going to do things. And so we're going to first do that in HR, where if I could make a claim that I worked for a company that no longer exists, and you're an employer and you want to hire me, I can make that claim. I don't just type it into LinkedIn. I actually make that claim, and then you can verify against the blockchain, be able to say, yes, I did work at that company, even though it doesn't exist anymore. And there's many examples like that. The challenge with blockchain is, how many people know what TCP/IP is? Just there are a few geeky people in here. This is good to see. All right, so we got some fellow geeks in here. So TCP/IP, 25 years ago, if you want to be the hot new company, you would want to build something with TCP/IP in it. TCP/IP, today, most people don't even know what it is, but none of the devices in this room would function without it. It runs the internet. So it is the underlying protocol for the internet. So all of the internet functions because of TCP/IP, and people don't know what it is. That's blockchain 25 years from now. So eventually, this technology, or something like it, will be guiding almost every transaction we make, but we won't even care. And the thing that has to happen in between is, just like the internet, we need to develop all the standards about how these things interact and where they're used. That takes a lot of time. So I wouldn't get too distracted with blockchain technologies at this point, not for their own sake. They might be the underlying technology under something you're trying to accomplish, but they really are infrastructure. And then in-memory analytics, I think this is a really important area, and it's something we're seeing more and more of. Again, all those consumer internet companies have been doing in-memory for a long time. What's in-memory? In-memory, so on your laptop, you have hard drive and you have memory. And a hard drive is what's called persistent, meaning when you turn your hard drive off, all the files stay there. So imagine you open up an Excel spreadsheet, and you're working away on it, you hit save, it saves to your hard drive, you turn your computer off, you turn it back on, it's still there. That's persistent hard drive memory. In-memory is called volatile, meaning whenever you turn off your machine, it disappears, but it's really fast. So when you open up that Excel spreadsheet, it pulls it into memory. You've ever noticed that when you first launch Excel, it takes a few seconds, it's grinding away, and then the spreadsheet's there, and then you can start typing away as fast as you want. When you hit save, it saves it to the disk, but if you didn't save it and the computer died for some reason, you'd lose all of that. It's held in memory. So hard drive, slow but persistent. Memory, fast but volatile, meaning you lose it. It also turns out that memory is pretty expensive. Not anymore, but it certainly was 30 years ago when many legacy systems were built. So everything was built to store stuff on disk, and it was slow because of that. So to do great analytics, where you're slicing and dicing information and you're pulling in not just the summary information from the general ledger, but every journal line, takes a lot of memory. We've gotten to the point now where memory is really cheap. So you can buy systems that do everything in memory. And Workday's done that as well. We've in fact been doing that since 2005. So the advantage you gain with that is you can do this analysis, you can quickly look at results that you're getting and drill down into the detail, and then from that say, oh, I need to add another dimension to this. I need to slice by a different dimension. You can do that in real time instead of having to go back to IT and say, can you add this dimension to the data warehouse? They put it onto it, they import that data into the data warehouse, and then they run it off the hard drive. You can do all of this in real time. So in-memory, I think, is a really important thing to look at in terms of, especially for the analytics side. And then the final one is platform as a service. I'm not going to spend a ton of time there. It's a great place first place to start when you're looking at your journey to the cloud. So platform as a service, if you're not aware of what it is like, Amazon has Amazon Web Services, there's Azure from Microsoft, Google has a similar platform where instead of writing applications on your servers, and in some cases with a lot of code, with platform as a service, you can do this in a very light way and do it in the cloud. And Workday's produced something like this as well, specifically for your HR and finance data. So our platform as a service is about using your HR and finance data. You can also use general purpose ones like I just described to be able to do that. It's a great first place to start down that adventure of learning how to take advantage of the cloud. So hopefully this is giving you a better picture of the cloud is about a lot more than where your data is being hosted. That's certainly part of it. But it needs to be about also how you're changing your business. What are you trying to do as a business? Where are you trying to move to? And what are the technologies that you choose underneath that to get you there? I don't want, even though I'm a technologist, I don't want anyone to get distracted with the technology. It's just a shiny object. It's easy to get distracted by it. And it's not just in IT they get distracted. Finance gets distracted by it as well. You hear about this new cool thing and you want to try to use it in your organization. If you think about the bigger picture of what you're trying to do, you're trying to be more efficient. If you're a small organization, you're trying to be, trying to acquire companies and move quickly. If you're a large organization, you're trying to transform your entire business, then looking at the cloud is a great way to do that. The last thing I'll say about this is systems themselves don't drive transformation. They just don't. It's not possible. It's just software. Again, it's not going to solve world hunger. It doesn't do that. But you can use implementing systems as a point to push transformation in your organization, to be able to convince people that the old way of doing things don't apply anymore. And giving them a really clear model of how to do that instead of being distracted by the technologies that you would be using to do that is the most valuable thing that you can do in terms of helping your organization have better control over how money flows through the organization. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'll be here for the rest of the day at the booth, and I'd be happy to chat with you further. Thanks.